In episode 2 of Leading the Deal, M&A in the legal sector, Jeff Zindani sits down with Axel Koelsch, COO of Lawfront, to discuss strategy, consolidation and culture, sharing golden nuggets on how regional leaders can scale nationally.
Axel, really grateful for you to talk to our listeners about what is happening in the sort of M&A space in the UK legal sector. For those people who have never heard of Lawfront, never even sort of come across the name before, you will, if you don't already know too much about them. They are one of the fastest growing legal groups in the UK. Started off, Axel, I think back in 2021. Now, I think there's 7 law firms you've actually brought into the group, and combined revenue, from what we understand, around about 130 million. Is that right? Have I got all that right?
It's 130 million. We have 6 hubs, is what we call our major firms. And we've done a total of 13 acquisitions over that period.
Wow. Okay. Didn't realize it was as many as that. Okay. Axel, let's just talk about your background. Can you give us a bit of an overview, really, of your professional journey? And I suppose, in a sense, pretty direct, what did draw you to Lawfront?
My personal history starts off really with studying law in Germany and being slightly frustrated because as a lawyer, I always felt I was being told by clients to do things I didn't think were right. And I wanted much more to shape businesses rather than just be told by other people to help them shape their business. So I took a slight turn into studying management in Harvard, spent a few years at McKinsey and advising people on how to run their businesses, as well as advising McKinsey internally on how to improve how they run their businesses. And that really then brought me into law firms to start advising law firms on their strategy and implementing that into operations. I then spent the next 20 years doing that for Magic Circle firms, doing that for leading national firms, always with a view how to drive strategic change and growth, international expansion, technology transformation, but always within that partnership model. What's always been driving me is what would it look like if you did this really well? For the last 2-3 years, while working within the large national firms, my test question to managing partners was always, I know we work within the constraints of a partnership, but if you were a private equity investor buying this law firm, what would you then really do? I met the guys from Blixt. I heard what they were planning to do, and I had to push them for quite some time to say, I really want to work with you. This is what I want to do. Yeah. And it really gives me, therefore, kind of a platform to do the things I wanted to do and prepared for the last 20 years in terms of what would a law firm look like if you ran it as a legal services business.
Okay. Now that's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Just for those people listening, actually, the Blix Group is a private equity. They are, of course, behind Lawfront. Okay, that's right. With that in mind, Axel, because I mean your journey is fascinating because it's almost a city advisory sort of background, a bit academic as well. Because I remember meeting you in London and thinking actually it's unusual to actually talk to somebody who's got a more empirical sort of view of things in terms of, hold on, because lawyers are pretty rational beasts and all the rest of it, but they don't always like data. Throws them a bit. Let's just turn to Lawfront because they've been very active, okay, in the sort of UK legal sector. What is the strategic vision? What is that sort of vision behind the business? And I suppose the second sort of question linked to that is, how do you think it's going to evolve really over the next few years?
So one of the things which really drew me to working with the Lawfront on this one is that there's a single clear strategic vision, which we see percolate through the acquisitions, through the operational model, through the financial model, and everything that we do. It's quite simple. It really is regional leaders with national scale. So our approach is that we invest into regionally leading law firms which have a broad practice but are subscale for the way we do law today. They're doing normally at the outset between 10 and 30 million turnover, and that's simply not the scale at which you can drive technology efficiently. That's not the scale at which you can procure some of the things we need efficiently, including things like PII. We give them, frankly, all the things I've built historically for national and global firms in terms of infrastructure, knowledge sharing, people capacity, and all other kinds of professional services skills, professional skills that you need to run a business nowadays. And we focus not on London, frankly, in a way, because that's a very over-lawyered, highly competitive market. What we want to do is to bring high-quality services and a high-quality working environment out to the regions where people otherwise don't really have access to those kinds of opportunities.
Again, just to help some people listening, actually, I mean, some of the firms were very well known and still are, of course, Nelson's, Farley's, Sleater Healis. And I think recently you've acquired Trethowens, a well-known established firm in the Southwest. So clearly they've joined the group with all of that in mind. And just listening to what you have to say, I mean, what I find fascinating is that firms are, of course, struggling, aren't they, with IT issues, infrastructure sort of issues, etc. So this is a kind of bit of a welcome type of relief, isn't it, in many respects, to the struggles they've got on a day-to-day basis, and presumably with the kind of strategy going forward with some of these firms.
So, because it came through in what you were saying, so key to operating model is that the firm remain firms as such.
Yeah.
So Trethowens does not become Lawfront. Trethowens continues as a brand in its market, but also really importantly as a cultural entity with their own managing partner and with the people work together in the existing context. We invest into successful firms with a strong people culture and all that brand and that identity in it. And I think that distinguishes us from other kind of operating models in the market.
Axel, let me just sort of open that up a bit, actually, because one of the difficulties I've got when I'm helping firms, particularly those firms looking to exit, is they will say, look, Jeff, we're going to lose our brand. We're going to lose the legacy. We're going to lose our identity. But underneath all of that, of course, is the culture within that firm. That, again, is clearly something they're very keen to retain, but there's clearly got to be some loss of independence, etc. Maybe we'll come on to that in a minute or two. Okay, so from your vantage point, given obviously your background, what do you think makes Lawfront so different to perhaps some of the consolidators or other law firms? I mean, in a way, you've already answered it to some extent in terms of brand and legacy. What do you think really is perhaps the secret sauce, if I can say that?
Well, as much of the secret sauce as I can divulge, it's fundamentally, I think there's two things. A, we do have a different concept and we invest in success. I think that's the way around. Some people otherwise may invest in turnaround. I think that is a valid business model. It's a different business model. One thing I learned over several years at McKinsey is there's a really simple lesson to strategy is find out what makes you successful and do more of that. And so what we're trying to do is to find firms which are successful in looking after clients and looking after people. And our objective is not to disturb that. And we identify the parts that can be done better by having that national scale, what the group can offer. That's what we bring in. And I think there is another distinguishing characteristic is I think both from my role and some other people we've brought into the exec team from the firms is we understand how law firms work. You may have seen that in some discussions that firms you work with have with private equity investors. When faced with a bunch of accountants on the other side, they may not have the same sense of how individuals tick, how that culture works, and how to build long-term success. It's easy to buy some firms. It is quite difficult, I think, to buy great firms and to support them in continuing to be successful and grow.
That really does help, I think, for people to sort of start to understand why you are different. And what I suppose a lot of people are interested in is some of the nuts and bolts. Obviously, you can't go into some of the detail because it's clearly confidential. But from a profile point of view, this is the kind of work I do in terms of trying to matchmake almost firms. What do you think is the kind of typical profile? You've already identified success, culture, etc. But is there anything specific, or perhaps let me turn it around a bit, really, it might be easier. What do you think are the non-negotiables, really? for a potential merger or acquisition? What do you think those red flags or non-negotiables are?
So for us, there's a few clear points which makes us turn around. Financial problems is one clear issue. A weak people culture. If it's not a happy ship, the group itself cannot turn that around as a culture. And that's linked to then, I think, strong leadership. So if you have good financial performance, individuals who are happy working there, and a strong management team, these are the three sort of core building blocks. There's a few other things which are important to us. One is that we want to buy balanced firms that have a strong portfolio which goes across several areas, just to weaken out fluctuations you will always see in residential, for instance, right now, PI going up and down. We look for balanced portfolios between corporate type work and work for individuals. And then what we're seeing now, we have 6 hubs currently. So the way we build it, we look for leaders in each of the regions. So we look for a clear leading profile in one of the regions. So if you are in Yorkshire or the Northeast, we're looking for people there. We try not to have overlaps between our firms. So our search profile is, I think, on those things. Our key point is we're not a nursing home for failing firms. And we see that other people will bid a lot more money for unprofitable firms. We just find when you start with success, it's much easier to grow success.
Just touching on some of the stuff we've already spoken about around culture and obviously non-negotiables, what I've seen, I don't know what your view is on this, is sometimes there's a disconnect between what the partners, the owners of the business are telling me or possibly telling you, and the real values or the culture of the business. When you start to really get under the bonnet of the firm, you start to actually think, hold on a second, there's a disconnect here. It is not as it appears. How do you really know until you perhaps get the keys of the car? Yeah?
I think we've learned over time that there are some indicators. And actually, what we see is getting any of these deals done really isn't easy. And you'll know that from your own experience.
Yeah.
Some of the best transactions we've done have taken years, several years to make happen. What we see is there's a different quality and value in the debate that you have with firms about whether they choose to join. Is someone asking how much money is in it for the equity partners? Is that the only thing they care about? Or are they having discussions with you around how do we retain the next generation of talent? Are they looking around building that next generation? Are they looking around retaining that cultural value, that independence? You'll find that out very quickly in the negotiations. So if someone is just looking to sell out and run for the hills, that's a pretty good indication of their behavior prior to the sale. And that's probably not a firm that we'd want to work with.
Now, that is really fascinating for me. Okay. And I'll tell you why. Because when I'm with law firm owners who are looking to perhaps exit, I almost see it as a bit of a red flag. We just want to cash out as quickly as possible, and we want to just get out as fast as possible. And that tells me there's something not quite right. That's a really good insight, actually, and I think it's worth opening that up sometimes. Just talking about integration. I mean, you're obviously the Chief Operating Officer of Lawfront. What I've seen with some of the deals I've been involved in is the failure, I think, sometimes to get to grips with integration. Everything's looking very exciting. The deal looks great, but not as much attention is paid to what's going to happen after the deal. And it's this integration playbook or the sort of plan that obviously is worked through. And I just really want to sort of ask you briefly, obviously we could talk all day about this actually in terms of integration, is what does that kind of mean in practice in terms of Lawfront?
It's a really good question, and I spent a lot of time on that. Integration, it has many different components, and just to think through it, there's your technical versus cultural, there's integration for fee earners versus the business services teams, and I think we've also thinking much more around the specific onboarding experience versus ongoing integration after that. We engage with firms very early on in terms of what that integration journey looks like. And very simply, we go back to the underlying proposition. If what we're doing is providing national scale to regional leaders, we actually do think through what does that mean in terms of experiences and value that we can create for all the different constituencies within a firm. We start preparing for that sort of around heads of terms stage, so many months before we actually launch. We try to start very practical planning several months then, even before we go to an announcement of any deal. The most critical part, I think, is around the experience your fee earners and clients have. The other bit is execution, but fee earners and clients need to have the experience of that. And we have a whole program that actually we look to deliver within the first 100 days, very clear experiences to all the fee earners around how their world will be, I like to say, the same, just better.
They definitely don't like disruption, do they, Axel?
I don't believe that whole shtick that lawyers hate change. I mean, I saw lawyers when you brought in the BlackBerry and they couldn't snaffle those things up quickly enough, right? So lawyers like change when it has a clear benefit to them and their clients in terms of doing that. What we do in each case is we provide clear nuggets of value to people in different parts of the organization within that first period. And for us, that can be, we very quickly bring in AI tools, train and enable fee earners to use these tools which they didn't have beforehand, because helping firms through the technology transformation is a key thing of that overall value proposition of national scale for regional leaders. And so our proof point is to deliver that to specific groups of individuals in quality early. You don't need to do everything for everyone all at once, but what you do need to do is prove out that you can deliver your promise. And I think that if early on you say, I promised this, I've delivered that, and what's coming down the line to support you is the following, then you build that trust. And then for me, therefore, that allows people to engage, collaborate, and that's really it. So deliver on what you promised.
Yeah, and I think going back to the kind of lawyer culture, they can be fairly cynical, can't they, really, about change. And when you start delivering, obviously, it does change things. Let's just deal directly with one of the big issues, of course, for a lot of firms, a lot of law firm owners with private equity. The conversations I have can actually be quite difficult because many of them will say, Jeff, external investment, we're going to lose our independence. What kind of firm is it going to look like? Now, to some extent, you've kind of already answered that. How would you address really the concerns when speaking to those sort of managing partners about that kind of loss of independence?
You asked two separate questions. One is around independence. The other one, what will the firm look like? And I think what will the firm look like? That's something we really discuss with people because it's around saying our ambition is for you to grow your firm to double or three times what it currently is. More often than not, that's something that the managing partner will have wanted to do anyway. You ask them, well, what's currently in your way? And they will say is like, well, we have those instances. We want to consolidate a number of smaller offers into a bigger one, but the current equity partner pool does not want to put up the money for that. It's like, well, that's not a problem. We can do that. We want to buy out some local competitors, but we don't have the cash for it, and bring them into equity would dilute us too much. Say, well, we have financial means and methods of doing that, and we can help you bring those people in. I need access to technology tools, AI, etc., or I want to transform my PMS. And it's like, well, we have those tools readily available and we can make them happen. So I think it's around saying, well, what do you want to achieve? And actually, if partnering with someone else helps you achieve a goal, that may not be independence as such, but as actually it enables you much more to do the things that you want to do.
Kind of goes against what they think, but actually gives them more freedom in a way, in more independence. But no, that kind of helps. Let's just be pretty open about this. I'm dealing with partners sometimes who clearly have very little understanding of what private equity is, what the model is, etc. And there's still, in my view, that knowledge kind of gap. Do you think that's still the position, where there's this kind of lack of really understanding of what goes on?
I think all firms who are in the sort of target size profile and range are probably getting contacted by private equity people all the time. I think there is certain familiarity up to a certain level of depth. I'm not sure whether they fully understand what life is like in that kind of firm. So I would actually counsel anybody who's asking themselves that, just speak to a managing partner in a firm that's been acquired. And so, contact any of our managing partners. And frankly, that's what we do with people who talk to us. Like, talk to the people who are 2-3 years into the journey and ask them what it's like. I would trust people who've been through the journey and to ask them. That's probably the best information. There is a big difference, I think, in the experience that you have, depending whether you have a direct PE investment or you being part of the group in the way that we have. Because dealing with a private equity fund directly is a very different kettle of fish.
That's actually a very interesting point you've made there, actually, because what we're looking at there is, of course, the sort of control auditing sort of issues, which are very different. And I think that's a cracking distinction you've made. What I'm struggling with sometimes is law firms who are responding almost aggressively saying, look, they're just asset strippers, Jeff. That's what private equity is about. We did a white paper earlier on in the year around private equity, and it's actually counterintuitive, of course, because it's a people business. But do you still feel that's the kind of respond to those sorts of questions sometimes? Or, how do you feel about that really in terms of, is it legitimate?
I fully understand the concern, because I think there's private equity investors in other types of industries who operate that way. We quite often have sessions with partners about and explain, how do we make money? It's very simple in the end. We are an early stage investor, and at some point someone else will probably invest more money in a law firm group, and they will look for two things. They will look at what is the sustainable long-term profit, so what's the EBITDA, and what multiple do we attribute to that? How much money are you making, and what's the quality and resilience of that income stream? What we explain to people is that quality component, that multiple, is driven by the fact whether you have stable relationships, whether you have loyal people, whether you have a clean regulatory record, and whether you're set up for the future. So we are actually probably much longer term thinkers in terms of creating value than an equity partner in his mid to late 50s who's just thinking about what money can I make in the next 5 years. We need to think about what will someone else in 5 years' time pay for the long-term prospects of this business.
It's a fundamentally different analysis, isn't it, really, if you think about it, to an LLP type model where full distribution of profits, sort of to some extent short-term returns, as opposed to medium long-term returns. So that's actually a very, very different business model. Axel, just moving ahead, how do you see consolidation sort of reshaping things, really perhaps over the next few years? What kind of part do you think law firm's going to play in that transformation?
So I think the key aspect in how the consolidation of private equity investment will reshape the legal services business is the question around propositions to talent. I guess what I see is we need to compete on the basis that individuals want to join and stay with firms like ours rather than going into a small regional partnership-based competitor. Therefore, we are raising the stakes, what this means in terms of people culture, in terms of technology offering you have, in terms of access to tools and skills to make you successful in that environment. I think that's where we will see the smaller firms in the 5 to 10 million pound bracket fall away. And I think one of the key dynamics that we'll all need to think about is, will equity partnerships continue to give themselves away?
Okay, that's quite controversial.
I've told sort of in the market for talent, what we're competing with is historically equity partners nearing retirement gifting the firm to the next generation in exchange for a bit of contribution to working capital. I think in that probably law firms are unique in still practicing that model. Any other business type I know,
no, you're right. You're right.
You sell your share in the business at some point in time. I think we need to be open. Part of the motivation in joining a private equity-based outfit is for equity partners who built a valuable business over 10, 20 years to say, do you know what? There's a bit of me in that, and I have forgone money and profits over a number of years to build this, and I want something in return for it when I retire. If that concept becomes accepted and becomes commonplace, then I think the corporate model with sustainable financing just becomes the dominant one in the sector of the business.
That's really fascinating. And I think also you've even had Clifford Chance talking their managing partner around about whether or not they would even look at private equity. Just finally, the last question. If you could offer one piece of advice to a managing partner who really is looking at these sorts of options, what would it be?
I spend a lot of time talking to managing partners around a deal and coming up with integration, talking about the why. Why are you doing this? What inevitably comes back for the people who decide to join us is around, because this enables our firm to be what, the best I think it can be. Therefore, I would flip the question around is, think about what you want your business to look like in 5 to 10 years' time in terms of size, reach, quality of offering, technology enablement. And then consider, can private equity help you get there or not? If the answer is maybe, strike up a conversation.
Okay, right. That's great. And that's great to kind of leave this podcast. Axel, thank you so much for your time. Really great insights. Great to talk to you again. I'm sure we can catch up over a coffee, and good luck with everything that's going on at Lawfront. I'm sure it's going to be even more successful going forward.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Following on from that interview with Axel, I thought it was very useful to try and put together my thoughts, really, or reflections on what was said, and to give some perspective on what was happening in the marketplace as well. I think what Axel did do was to set out a very clear and really a very simple playbook as far as Lawfront strategy is concerned. I think it's unmistakable, isn't it? This is regional leaders with national scale. They're definitely not chasing London, and they're not trying to fix distressed firms. And they were trying to build these strong regional brands. How far they'll go with that is to me still unclear, but they're definitely looking to acquire practices that are strong. And I think he was very blunt about this. It's not, and Lawfront is definitely, he said, not a nursing home for failing firms. And I think that was a brilliant quote, which I'm sure I'm going to use, actually. They definitely invest in success. And what I think is perhaps in sharp contrast to some of the other consolidators is their clear strategy around successful practices and those firms that are probably have got strong leadership teams as well. When we spoke about culture, and for those listeners who've heard me speak at conferences and elsewhere, I've probably become more obsessed with law firm culture when I'm dealing with the deals on the buy side and on the sell side. And what Lawfront offer is something quite compelling. He clearly sees culture as king, and those acquired firms are keeping names they've had, of course, before. The leadership team seems to remain intact, which is, again, very compelling. And I think with that, they're going to keep intact, I would have thought, the firm's culture. So legacy isn't going to be erased. It's going to be largely protected. So I think in a nutshell, that's how Lawfront, I think, are able to win over trust. And there is a lot of resistance. We know that when it comes to PE-backed law firms. So that trust, I think, is going to be won over when others, I think, are going to meet more resistance. When we spoke about integration, clearly he is an expert given his background. And what I particularly liked was his 100-day rule to deliver visible improvements in that time. And it's that focus on short-term sort of improvements to, again, win over trust from AI tools, tech upgrades. And I think that kind of operational muscle which Lawfront now have. When we spoke about what is going to motivate firms to perhaps join Lawfront, I was again intrigued by his thoughts, particularly about spotting the wrong motives. And it's something I've seen. It's not always a bad thing, but I do get a bit concerned when I see, what I've termed the cash out merchants. And I think this can be a red flag for buyers. That, again, can be seen during the course of negotiations where we almost can reveal the type of culture of the firm that's being acquired or even merged. And that's well before the ink is dry. When we spoke about private equity, and I suppose the critique around private equity in the legal space, particularly around independence, he really did, I think, try to explain how Lawfront would deal with this. And I think when it comes to capital behind these firms, we're looking now at a very different model which will quickly modernize these firms. And that must have caused competitors a lot of concern because particularly in the regions, they're moving fast. And I think freedom, almost sort of something which is counterintuitive when people talk about private equity, starts to look very different with Lawfront because growth is now being funded properly. Growth provides momentum, attracts talent. People stay, of course. And what I've seen in firms that are quite static, a lot of good people go. It really is a struggle to sort of retain and recruit talent. Axel also, I think, debunked fairly persuasively the asset stripping criticism, which has been levelled against PE-backed businesses, not just in the legal sector. And really this myth that really we've got short-term extraction destroying value, which again, to me, seems pretty obvious, particularly in a people business. And I think what he was getting at was Lawfront's model really depending largely on sustainable net profits or turned into an EBITDA, loyal people, and that kind of client trust is where the action is in terms of how Lawfront view the market. One of the points he raised about this shift in capital as far as law firms are concerned was very revealing and to me absolutely fascinating, because what he was getting at was now partners can essentially transfer capital when previously partners had effectively gifted capital, older retiring partners gifting their capital, their firm, if you want to call it that, or part of their firm, to the next generation of younger partners. And I think that's the nub of this. This is where the real tension is in practice between the older partners and the younger partners, the sort of old guard and the new gen, which are, of course, the future of the firm, and how that's dealt with, really. So that, to me, in terms of the way it's transforming the legal sector is critical. And it's kind of reshaping things, of course, particularly in terms of some of the things he covered, in terms of growth, in terms of the way they can compete, etc. We've also got to say that Lawfront are not the only PE-backed law group in town, particularly in the regions. We've seen recently, of course, Higgs & Co., well-known Midlands firm, being acquired by August Equity. Towards the end of last year, we had FBC being acquired by Horizon, and FBC being, again, another large Midlands firm. We also shouldn't forget Knights either, who have made, is it 24, 25, 26? Who knows in terms of acquisitions, but they're extremely active in the same sort of space. And that, I'm sure, will continue. And I think really, lastly, I suppose the bigger question, is this the new model for the mid-market? Strong regional firms backed by capital, retaining identity, yet scaling nationally. Are they going to be able to pull it off? Well, I'll let you decide that. In fact, it won't be any of us deciding it. It will be, of course, the marketplace. Thanks for listening.